Just then, a long white limousine pulled into the clearing. It was bright and shiny with white wall tires and a silver horse for a hood ornament. It parked next to Mrs. Grimm's car, and a little man got out of the driver's side. He couldn't have been more than 3 feet high. In fact, he was no taller than Daphne. He had a big bulbous nose and a potbelly that the buttons of his black suit struggled to contain. But the most unusual thing about the man wasn't his size or his clothing. It was the pointy paper hat he wore on his head that read, "I am an idiot." He rushed as quickly as he could to the other side of the car, opened the back passenger door, and was met with a barrage of insults from a man inside. Wrong person, wrong accent. "Mr. Seven, sometime today," the man bellowed in an English accent. "Do you think I want to sit in this muggy car all afternoon waiting for you to find time to open the door? You know, when you came to me for a job, I happily gave you one, but every day you make me regret it." A tall man in a purple suit exited the limousine and looked around. He had a strong jaw, deep blue eyes, and shiny black hair. He was probably the best-looking man Sabrina had ever seen, and her heart began to race. That was until he opened his mouth again. "What is this? Heads are going to roll, Mr. Seven," the man fumed as he looked around. "Yes, sir," Mr. Seven answered. "I was told that this was taken care of last night, and it's just lucky that I realize that everyone who works for me is an incompetent boob, or we would never have known this was still out here until it was too late. My goodness, look at that rubbish sitting there in broad daylight. What do the 3 think I pay them for? I can't have this nonsense going on right now. Doesn't everyone realize that the ball is tomorrow? Heads are going to roll, Mr. Seven." The little man nodded in agreement. His boss looked down at Sabrina and Daphne and scowled. "Look, the tourists are already here, and they're leaving their filthy children unsupervised. They are children, right, Mr. Seven? Not just a couple more of your kind?" Mr. Seven's dunce cap had slid down over his eyes. He lifted it and gazed at the 2 girls. "They're children, sir." "The way they are dressed, you would think they were circus folk. You worked in the circus for some time, didn't you, Mr. Seven?" The little man nodded. "Why, there ought to be a law about unsupervised children. This is a crime scene, and it's crawling with kids. Mr. Seven, let's make that a law, if that isn't too much trouble," the man continued. "No trouble at all, sir," said Mr. Seven, as he took a spiral-bound pad and pen from his jacket pocket and furiously jotted down his boss's instructions. "See how easy it is to be a team player, Mr. Seven? I like your change of attitude. If you keep this up, we might be able to get rid of that hat," the man said. "That would please me, sir." "Let's not rush things, Mr. Seven. After all, you still haven't given these children my card, which is incredibly frustrating, especially since we discussed this just last night. What did I tell you, Anne?" "Give everyone your card. It's good networking." "Indeed it is," the man replied, tapping his toe impatiently. Oh, here's a look at this guy. There's poor Mr. Seven. "So sorry, Mr. Charming, sir," Mr. Seven said as he rushed to the girls and shoved a business card into each of their hands. It was purple with a golden crown on one side and the words, "Mayor William Charming, here to lead you," written on it in gold lettering. Underneath the name were a telephone number, an email address, and a website, www.mayorcharming.com. "Now, what was I saying before I had to tell you how to do your job, Mr. Seven?" But before the little man could answer, Sabrina stepped forward. If there was one thing she couldn't stand, it was a bully. "You were saying there ought to be a law against unsupervised children," Sabrina said angrily. "There should be a law against talking to people like they are morons, too." "Yes, that's correct. See, Seven, if this carnival girl can pay attention to the conversation, why can't you? Why, she can't be more than 8 years old, and certainly slow in the head," Mayor Charming said. "I'm almost 12, Sabrina shouted, "and I'm not slow." Mayor Charming seemed startled by her anger. "Where are your parents, child?" he snapped. "We're here with our..." Oh, wrong person. "We're here with our grandmother," Daphne answered. Sabrina spun around on her sister angrily. The old lunatic was not their grandmother. How splendid for you, Mayor Charming sneered. And who is your grandmother? Daphne pointed to Mrs. Grimm, who was busy taking notes on a little pad of paper. Rhoda Grimm is your grandmother? The mayor growled between gritted teeth. When will this cursed family die out? You're like a swarm of cockroaches. Mrs. Grimm looked over, saw Mayor Charming, and quickly came to join them. Rhoda Grimm, I just met your granddaughters, the mayor said, as his face changed from a scowl to a smile. They're the spitting image of their grandfather. He bent over and pinched Daphne on the cheek. Hopefully they'll grow out of it, he muttered. Mayor Charming, what brings you all the way out here? I thought you'd be busy planning the fundraiser. It's in a couple of days. Correct? Said Mrs. Grimm with a forced smile. That doesn't sound like her voice, but I can't remember what I did for her voice right now. Okay, hold on. Oh, children. Okay. It's so much easier to do this in class when I can make sure the voices are right. It is not a fundraiser, Charming insisted. It's a ball, and it is tomorrow night. But you know how the community is. If I don't investigate every little stray cloud, the flock gets nervous. Oh, that was the grandma's accent. How is it? You are in school. Hold on, let me get the British accent again. Thank you. All right. I always have to go back to Harry Potter in my mind to get the English accent. Especially because I'm trying to make more of like a low country accent, because even though he's technically like supposed to be charming here, he is pretty rude and he seems uneducated. All right. Let's see. If I don't investigate every little... I'm making him either Irish or Scottish. Okay, hold on. Every little stray cloud, the flock gets nervous. But then again, I could ask you the same question. What is the famous Rhoda Grimm doing in the middle of nowhere, looking at a broken house? He was right. It was a house that had fallen down. Sabrina saw pieces of furniture and clothing sticking out of the pile and an old Afghan quilt swinging from a stick in the breeze. I don't know what the farmer expected with such shoddy workmanship. He's lucky to have crawled out alive, he continued. So, there was a survivor, Mrs. Grimm said, writing in her notebook. Here she goes. Oh, I can't get his voice. Here she goes, Mr. Seven. You can almost see the wheels spinning in her head. Rhoda Grimm, private eye, out to solve the case that never was, the mayor said. See, that's the problem. That's the problem with you Grimms. You could never quite grasp that in order to solve a mystery, there must be a mystery to solve. A farmer built a flimsy house and it fell down. It was an accident. Case closed. Then why did you call it a crime scene? Sabrina piped up. Charming turned and gave her a look that could have burned a hole through her. You must have misheard me, child, he said between gritted teeth. Mr. Seven, take down this note, please. New law. Children should not ask questions of their elders. As the little man scribbled furiously in his notebook, Mrs. Grimm said, We both know why you're here, Mayor. Charming's face turned red. He tugged on his necktie and adjusted his collar. This is none of your concern, Rhoda. Before the old woman could respond, Mr. Canis joined the group. Well, if it isn't the big bad... Mayor Charming, said Mrs. Grimm angrily. Oh, I'm sorry. I heard you were going by Canis. I just made him American. Really, the way Charming talks here, just side note here, the way he talks, I feel like he ought to be just an annoying American, but okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I heard you were going by Canis now. Charming grinned and leaned in close to Sabrina and Daphne. Do yourselves a favor, girls, and check Granny's teeth before you give her a good night kiss. Do you think it wise To provoke me, Mr. Canis said as he took a step toward the mayor. Despite Mr. Canis's quiet demeanor, the words seemed to unnerve Charming. That's enough, Mrs. Grimm demanded. Her voice shocked the girls, but the effect on the two grown men was even more startling. They backed away from each other like two schoolboys who had been scolded by a teacher. The dog has found something, Mr. Canis said gruffly. He placed an enormous green leaf in Mrs. Grimm's hand, and her eyes lit up in satisfaction. Well, look at that, Mayor Charming. I think we found a clue. There might be a mystery to solve here yet, she said, waving the leaf in the mayor's angry face. Congratulations, you found a leaf in the middle of all these trees, Charming scoffed. I bet if you could bring out the forensics team, you might find a twig, or even an acorn. It looks a lot like a leaf from a beanstalk, the old woman replied. Charming rolled his eyes. That proves nothing. Maybe not, but it does seem odd that a fresh green leaf is out here in late November, Mrs. Grimm said. Sabrina looked around at the trees. Every limb was bare. Listen, Relda, stop meddling in our affairs or you're going to regret it, said the mayor. If you don't want me meddling, then you must really do a better job of covering up your mistakes. Mrs. Grimm placed the leaf inside her handbag. The mayor scoffed and then turned to Mr. Seven. Get the door, you lumpy bag of foolishness, he shouted. The little man nearly lost his paper hat as he rushed to the car door. Within moments, the limo was spitting gravel behind it as it drove away. Girls, why don't we take a walk over to that hill and sit by the tractor? I'd like to see this sight from above, Mrs. Grimm said. Daphne took the old woman's hand and helped her up a sloped embankment where a lonely tractor was parked. When they reached the top, the old woman plopped on the ground and caught her breath. Thank you, Liebling. Thank you, Liebling. Either the hills are getting steeper or I'm getting older. Who is that man? Daphne asked. Let's just say he's a royal pain, Mrs. Grimm replied. Mr. Charming is the mayor of Fairyport Landing. What's with the bad attitude? Sabrina said. The mayor reminded her of the orphanage's lunch lady, who seemed to delight in telling the children they were getting fat. He gets a little territorial sometimes. He and Mr. Canis sure don't like each other, Daphne added. They have a long history, the old woman said. She picked a small black disc off the ground. How interesting. She happily jotted down a note in her notebook. A lens cap from what looks like a very expensive video camera. Maybe it's just junk or something the farmer lost, Daphne said. Maybe. Or maybe whoever's responsible for all that damage wanted a record. Mrs. Grimm tossed the lens cap into her handbag. Just then, a white van with the words Action 4 News painted on the side pulled up. The doors swung open and a cameraman and a pretty reporter in a business suit jumped out. The reporter checked her hair in a compact mirror as the cameraman handed her a microphone. They eyed the pile of lumber and brick and then spotted the girls and the old woman sitting on the hill. In no time, they were standing before them. Hello, ladies. I'm Wilma Fay from Action 4 News, the reporter said as she shoved her microphone in Mrs. Grimm's face. We were wondering if you might be able to tell us what happened here. Oh, dear. Am I on television? The old woman asked. You will be, the reporter replied. Tell our audience what you witnessed. Oh, we didn't see anything, I'm afraid, said Mrs. Grimm. We only just got here. The reporter groaned, and the cameraman lowered his camera. This is just great, Wilma Fay complained. 5 years of journalism school, graduating with honors in the top of my class, and I'm out here in Fairyport Landing in the cold, covering a house that collapsed. I'll get some shots of the damage, the cameraman said as he hoisted his heavy video camera back onto his shoulder and walked down the hill to the rubble. Good idea, the reporter replied. Let's get out of here as soon as possible. Sorry I couldn't be of any help, said Mrs. Grimm. Oh, it's not your fault. I just keep getting sent out to this town where there isn't any news. Yes, unfortunately, there's not a lot of excitement in Fairyport Landing, the old woman agreed. I still don't think I have her voice right. I'm sorry. I'll keep practicing it. Whatever. When the news crew had left, Mrs. Grimm removed the large green leaf and an odd little box covered in knobs and lights from her handbag. She placed the leaf on the ground, then pushed a red button on top of the box and waved it over the leaf. "What are you doing?" Daphne asked. "I'm analyzing it. Very scientific stuff," the old woman said, just as the machine let out a loud honking sound that could only be described as a fart. "Just as I thought. It's from a giant beanstalk." "There's no such thing as giant beanstalks," Daphne giggled. Mrs. Grimm pointed at the clearing below. "What do you see?" "A house that fell down?" the little girl suggested. "Yes, but what else? What is surrounding the house?" Sabrina focused her attention on the rubble. What was so unusual about it? Nothing, really, except maybe for the large area of sunken ground that surrounded it. "The earth is mashed around it," she said. "And what could cause something like that to happen?" Oh, there it is. There's her voice. "I don't know. What do you think?" Sabrina said, after running through the possibilities. "I think a giant stepped on it," Mrs. Grimm answered. "Find a giant beanstalk leaf, and you'll probably find a giant." Daphne began to laugh, but Sabrina was horrified. The old woman was getting crazier by the second. "Well, I better go down and have a second look," the old woman said as she climbed to her feet. She walked back down the hill and joined Mr. Canis at the pile. "She's funny," Daphne giggled. Funny in the head, Sabrina thought. "I want to ride on the tractor," Daphne cried. She jumped up and pulled her sister over to it. Sabrina lifted the little girl onto the seat, who then grabbed the wheel and turned it, making vroom vroom sounds as she pretended to drive. "Look at me, I'm a farmer," she said, in a goofy voice. Sabrina looked up at her sister and laughed. Daphne was the funniest person she had ever met. "What kind of food do you grow on this here farm, Farmer Grimm?" The older girl played along. "Why, I grow candy on this here farm," Daphne laughed. "Bushels and bushels of candy. Just sent my crop to market last week. Got me a pretty penny, I did." Sabrina smiled, but then a shadow covered her heart. Why did the old lady have to lie about who she was? Why did she have to make up crazy stories? Why couldn't she be normal? Her house was warm and comfortable, and as long as Sabrina kept an eye on Mr. Canis, they might just be okay. If the old woman wasn't a lunatic, she'd make a perfect grandmother. "Sabrina, look at the house," Daphne whispered. She stopped playing and was staring at the pile below. Sabrina looked down at the clearing but saw nothing new. "Do you see what I see?" Daphne cried, pointing. "What? What do you see?" "Come up here. You have to see it from up here." Sabrina crawled up onto the tractor and stood high on its hood. "Do you see it?" And then Sabrina saw what her sister was so excited about, and her heart leaped into her throat. The indentation surrounding the broken-down house had a shape. "It's a footprint," she gasped. All right, these chapters are pretty long, so I will be getting into Chapter 3 next week. Chapter 3 is not quite as long as Chapter 2, so hopefully that can be all one video. Hope you enjoyed the second half of Chapter 2. Bye, 5th grade. I love you.